One of these days, I want to know, Sharon.
We're never going to know.
I really want to know.
You're
Yeah.
never going to know.
But
Well,
it's
good
not a
morning and
Rickroll moment.
welcome.
Sorry. I was just thinking that we could have a Rickroll right there. Yeah. Okay, sorry. But good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files. This series is for anyone who manages projects for a living. So if you've ever been a project manager, program manager, product manager, group manager, operations manager, or maybe even owned your own business, wear all the hats, this weekly series is definitely for you. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
Hello, Sharon. And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I explore project management topics and from the perspective of what not to do as you manage projects. In each episode of the Project Failure Files, we'll talk about the common pitfalls, sharing some personal stories and experiences, and explore strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
And in this episode, we are going to discuss an in-depth topic that has come up over several episodes.
Yep.
And it's when change management is not a core organizational strength.
Which doesn't sound like a project management centric organization. I would call that a textbook dichotomy of like we are project oriented, yet we're not good at change.
Right. Agreed. If you're project centric, but you kind of struggle organizationally with change management, there's definitely a disconnect that's holding your organization back.
And it should be a great discussion. But as with every episode, please feel free to comment throughout the episode and share your experiences and any great examples or feedback that we may have missed. So we are tracking conversations across X, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So hopefully we should see everything over in the in our dialogue boxes there. But yeah, so please share, comment.
So let's get started by defining change management. So in the context of project management, how do you view change management?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of a few different definitions of this because we talk about change a lot, but I look at it as I think of it as a process, something that is repeatable. Again, change is constant in life. We know that. So it's about having a process or a methodology on helping your organization through a transition. So ensuring that you've mitigated any risks, that any changes are implemented smoothly and effectively. Yeah.
That's a long definition.
I know. Stuff changes and we work it out. We figure it out.
Are we allowed to use the word change in the definition of change management? Is that allowed now?
Circular? I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's the idea, the definition of change is, when things don't happen the way you expect to happen. So, which we talk about in project management all the time. I think this topic is really timely for a lot of reasons. And I also think it's really important. I just led a session over the summer, actually, at a large conference around change management. And the room was so full. There was people like literally standing in the doorway. And that tells me, kind of how important it is right now. I think every once in a while, we kind of go through this season of don't do it that way just because we've done it always that way. And so I think This is really timely to have that conversation.
Well, we've talked about that in a couple different episodes as well about taking the time to intentionally go back and review your process, review your methodology. And when I ran PMOs, it was very much like that. We're constantly looking inward at here's how we're doing this. Is this the right way? Is this meeting the needs? These templates that we're using, are they the right pieces? And that all falls into this change management topic. And I mean, there's so much change that happens but that really is the core of the project manager's role in modern, the modern workplace. It's about here is the plan of record. Something is changing, something new requirements, new people, failure. The data is not showing that we can move to the next step. How do we mitigate that? That is a change. So how you respond to that change is key. And that's where if an organization shuts down every time there's a major change and people freak out and they're not sure how to move forward, that's an indicator that your organization might not be good at change.
Well, I don't know if you remember this back in the old days, when we had like, gigantic formal teams that did things. I've worked at multiple organizations that had their own change management, like dedicated, groups and dedicated professionals that were separate. So like, for example, if we had a large, especially multi-year project, you would have one or more project managers that would participate in that. And then oftentimes you would have a separate change manager that would come into it.
Yep.
And so I feel like when we think about mature organizations that are taking change management seriously, they're dedicating resources to change management itself and then keeping track of it and having strategies around it and things like that. But what we're talking about today is not that. We're talking about the organizations that instead, to your point, are saying, well, we don't need that. That's a luxury. Why would we even bother with having dedicated people, dedicated resources, dedicated stuff? Instead, how about the project manager just be responsible for that?
Yeah. Well, this is and I know that we both had experiences working with organizations that were really bad at this activity. And I was thinking of like, what are some of the traits of that, things that I saw? Like I remember with a client where I was brought in to help organize operations, and we did a lot of things. We kind of cleaned up shop for this very large organization. And there was like the first thing I noticed was that there was really poor communication. There wasn't sharing information that really got into more of that Wild West where the people that were really good at their jobs just kind of focus heads down on their job, but the overall process, I mean, even they had difficulty in communicating up and information communicating down. So there was low morale. They had constant delays. There was resistance from the organization of basic things that there should have been agreement on before the project ever launched. So you had, in this example, you had an executive that was relatively new that was like, we're going to make this change happen. We're going to force this through on the technology, on the projects. And the PMs were left trying to bring everybody across the line, like over to that plan. So they were fighting the cultural battles that
What
came
plan?
from, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely worked in many of those types of places. In fact, one time I got brought in many years ago. I got brought into a position, and when I walked in the door, I'm going to lay the scene here. A software development company. I walked in the door, and one of the reasons they brought me in was to help with this. They're developers. Okay, so the people who are making the product at that point were individually working on their own segments and taking phone calls directly from the stakeholders in terms of everything from, feature requests to support issues to everything. It was all going directly to the individual developers. That's how kind of, all apart it has gotten. And the whole idea there was that, like, how would you even manage a change at that level? Because they're all going to individual places. So they're all happening, kind of in siloed worlds. And so one of the reasons I was brought into that role was to unify things and bring things together so that there was a plan and there was a project and there were things that were being communicated and documented. So I think when we think about, organizations that are really suffering from weak change management, I think of that place where, it had really broken down to the point that the stakeholders were having to go directly to the people who were doing the things for them because there was really no process or plan in place in between.
But I think about that scenario because I've had that exact experience. In fact, I think we talked about this a bit, last week as well. There's a lot of overlap between these topics, but so when people go directly to the resources, so having again run shared services teams and PMOs, and when you have the business units, the stakeholders, which have valid requests that are out there, but by ignoring the process and the structure, you subvert the process. And what happens is that because those folks that are coming in with their valid requests, but have no idea what the prioritization process is. what the again, this is where we were talking about, I think it was a couple of weeks back, about the stand-up meetings.
Mhm.
And one of the usefulness of that as a tool is to get everybody on the page and also drill into their heads the process, the structure. Because once people understand and see the movement, see the progress of that structure, like, here's a list of our projects, here's who we have working on them, here's the ETA for each one of those, and then here are new requests over on the side. And so this, if you remember, I was saying that I have had this conversation so many times, which somebody coming in, a semi-belligerent director of another business unit that is just like, my project, my project, my project. Say, okay, is your project more important than this one? No.
Mhm.
Is it more important than this one? No. All right. So then you see it's place, the prioritization is it's number 5. We only have the people to work on the first 4 right now. You're next. And we'll reach out in the communication. So can you give us more time, more money, more people that we can move faster on that? But in that case, but by them going around that process, going directly to the PM, directly to the engineers, and then I would have PMs and engineers, analysts coming back to me and be like, I'm getting these demands from this person, they're irate. And I would have to go have conversations. And I'm like, your job, like, you do not have the ability to say yes to their requirements. Like, I hate playing that, but you don't have that right to do that. You come to me, like, put all blame on me. So they come to me, say, there's nothing I can do, go talk to Christian. And then I would have those hard discussions. But that's what it took to get people to pay attention to. There's a reason why we're doing it the way, to stay organized, to be the most efficient with our personnel, with our time, with budgets, and the prioritization, and that we're responsible to up the chain. In that case, it was to the VP, the SVP, and communicate, hey, here's the plan, here's where we are against these things in this prioritization, and if there's change, here are the new requests. Is there a reprioritization that needs to happen? You can't have those discussions if it's just Wild West, everybody doing whatever they want.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking is, at an individual level, like, solving those smaller problems might feel like it's better. It's a little more agile. It's a little more quick. You're getting problems solved. But what you don't understand is that at a larger picture, you're missing critical steps in the process that ultimately are going to cause, larger issues, long-term problems. I mean, I think about, even things like maybe things aren't tested thoroughly, maybe they're not documented properly, maybe training isn't rolled out the way that it should be. And so what ends up happening is maybe today is okay. Maybe you've solved your immediate burning problem quicker, but down the road, you're just creating more problems for yourself that ultimately might put you in a much larger risk level that had you dealt with change management properly, you're going to be in a much better bucket. So
it just reminds me, I was in the grocery store on Saturday, and now being empty nesters, and I know you recognize this too, and I saw there was a mom that had a newborn in a carrier, like in the basket, in the trolley. And then had like a 2 to 3 year old that was screaming, like we could hear them on the other side of the store,
as one does,
grocery store, coming over. And you have the people that instantly hear the comments like, I can't believe that, like, that mother can't get control of. And I'm just like, what could she do? The kid clearly needs a nap. She had to come to the store and get the stuff. Like, I just felt like I wanted to go over and just say, hey, it's okay, you want me to walk along with you? And then my wife says, it's like, you can't do that nowadays. Like, that's creepy. Like an older male coming over and offering to comfort. And I'm like, okay. But I said, I wanted to say some words of encouragement to her, like, hey, don't worry about it. Like, we've all been there, kind of thing. Same thing with this organization. That's why I'm making the connection here, where if you, it's like with a toddler, if you, every time they scream and throw a fit, you give them what they're asking for, they'll never learn to grow up. And it's the same with organizational change. I've been given feedback from my teams over the years that two stories, like analogies they don't like. There's that, the screaming baby, and the other one is training a puppy that's
Oh yeah.
going to the bathroom in the house.
Yeah.
Like they don't.
Yeah.
So we're the puppies in this situation. Like,
House training.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you are. Yeah.
I mean, it's just behavioral psychology 101, right? Which is the idea of there's a difference between immediate gratification and delayed gratification. And when we talk about risk, the more you immediately gratify things, the higher the chances that the risk will be higher later on. Whereas the more that you delay that gratification and have a plan in place, the lower your overall risk is.
Yeah. Well, I think of it too culturally. We're not going to learn, we're not going to grow, we're not going to improve on the process if we're not following that process. So
Yes.
think about that. If you, as again, it's really difficult to go and track people's time, how much time is lost. We're in a future topic. We're going to be talking about multitasking and the lie that is multitasking. But if you're divided, if
They're
you're
not
running,
multitasking during that.
yeah, I mean, well, what else are you going to do? Because you have the projects that you know are the higher priority, but you're trying to, as people pleasers, a lot of us are,
Mhm.
Well, I'm not. I'd say a lot of you are. As my wife, in fact, said yesterday, she's like, "You're not a people pleaser or person." I'm like, "No, I'm not." Like that makes no sense. I see what I hear what you're asking, and the answer is no. No, I'm not going to do that. No, but we're not going to learn and change the organization. We're not going to improve upon things if it's chaos. Just like my point was, it's difficult to track the time and the effort, and then go back and look at our projects and learn, like, what could we do better. Well, we'll never have an accurate baseline of a project if every time the project is chaos. You
Mhm.
need to have consistency, create a baseline, learn from that, repeat the process, learn from that, make adjustments to move even faster. And the idea is that you want people to be able to do more and move faster, but you'll never be able to do that with chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I think of this. I'm a solution architect by trade, really. I mean, I have done BA work, I've done PM work, and I would say more of my career has landed kind of squarely in that solution architecture space and administration space. And I think about this from a holistic perspective, often in terms of how are we going to architect this, project or environment or program that to be successful. And at the end of the day, the more that everybody gets what they want individually, the harder it is for the group to be successful overall, because each individual part is kind of contributing to that whole. So when we think of this architecturally, when we think about long-term maturity, long-term change management, long-term project management, the more that we can identify, like you said, a baseline, we understand like where we're at and what we're doing. And we understand what the variables are that we're going to be managing to, the more that we can successfully minimize our risk, because we know that when we make this change, we know that when a change comes in, whether it's a managed change or an unmanaged change, right? Managed change is we know that it's happening. We've got our hands around it. We're doing something around it. We have a lot of control over it. Unmanaged change is things that happen to us that maybe we weren't planning for, or maybe we didn't expect. Either way, if we understand our baseline, we understand our variables, and we have a plan and a process in place to manage that change, when that change comes in, we are way, way, way better equipped as an organization to be able then to manage it, minimize our risk, mitigate the issues, and continue to be successful in delivering the project.
Yeah, it's all about, I mean, this truly is about empowering employees to have more control over their work. I mean,
Yes.
if all you're doing is fighting fires, you're down in the weeds of these things that you can never see up, then you're never going to have those epiphany of like, hey, we should be doing things this way, or this would be much more efficient. You're just trying to put out fires. And so, yeah, it goes back to having structure. And when we say structure, we're not talking about bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, like adding layers. Like, you need to be smart about it. But part of that is with any methodology is you're applying that. And then you realize, for this scenario, this project, this phase of our methodology is not applicable. So let's move on past this. But we've asked those questions. We identified that this project can move past this and we could be more efficient. So what do you think, Sharon, about the key elements that go into a successful change management strategy? What kind of top of mind, what comes to mind?
I mean, I feel like we're starting to say this in like every single episode. And what's really funny, and I think I've even mentioned this, is that we have found this in workshops, we found this in sessions, we found this in conversations. But I think really at the heart and soul of everything is good, solid communication, a communication plan that is being followed, and that we understand who needs to be communicated with and what needs to be communicated out on a regular basis. And everywhere I'm looking right now, everybody I'm talking to, everything that I interact with, it just keeps popping up as one of the biggest risks. And it's interesting to me because I never really thought about it that way, but the more it's being brought up, just day to day everywhere, the more I'm really understanding how integral and how important it is, and how it can really make or break a project, a program, an organization, an event, right? How big of a deal communication is at the core of something.
And I think you can err on the side of too much communication. I think that's better than the opposite.
100%. I'd rather be over communicated to than not, right? I 100% would rather get too much information. And now I'm not saying just talk to me nonstop, but I would rather be over informed and decide when I want to ignore some of that information than to be under informed, for sure.
And that's where it's another topic that we identified that we actually put later in our schedule, where consolidating communication. So to your point, we're not talking about because we've all had this experience where each stakeholder wants their own report, look and feel, the information they're looking for. It's like, you can't do that. And then you'll do nothing as a PM but do status reporting, trying to format those rather than actually impact the project and move it forward more quickly.
Yes.
So you have to, this is again where if you have structure around the change, and part of your communication is to communicate, here is our cadence for meetings, for reporting, for this is where you find the data, this is where you make requests, the feedback loops. All of that is part of that structure, part of that methodology, so that as it applies, you have it, the tools are there, and you know where to go and to look. That's why, I mean, I love those meetings where there's the agenda, there's a structure to those calls. We would get in, there's a project team. 5 minutes later, we're done. Okay, hey, this is what we're working on. There's no additional asks. We don't know, the risks haven't surfaced. So we're going to plan of record. Let's move forward. All right, let's get out of here. We don't need to sit here talking in a circle. Let's go. That's fantastic. But when change happens, when risks become reality and you now go into mitigation planning, like, you have the placeholders for those discussions and how we're communicating that out. So that is key. That was also my number one. I had number two as stakeholders, because their level of involvement, especially something as big as this, like if there is not executive level support, whatever the more senior leadership level in your organization for this, then it's not going to happen. Like you'll have pretty presentations and it'll never go anywhere.
I think about that. I've spent many years doing dog and pony shows, right? And the whole idea of a dog and pony, if you don't know what a dog and pony is it's the idea of trying to convince upper management, executives, leaders to buy in to make a change. Often, usually it's around making a change in the organization. And what you're trying to do is really convince them that this is the right thing to do for whatever reason. And I feel like the organizations that I work with, where they have senior leadership or above, that is not either they're supportive of change, they're supportive of this change management, policies, and or they're the ones themselves saying we need to continue to change, we need to be good about change. I find that those organizations are more mature, they're more adaptive, they're more flexible, and ultimately more successful than organizations where the leadership has to be dragged kicking and screaming into any sort of change conversation.
Yeah, completely agree. I was thinking of other components. There are two other things. Like one was like doing your research, like leveraging the community, leveraging the best practice that are out there, because there are models. There's theory out there about things. There's probably industry examples that you can go take a look at around. So there's a lot of data, and you'll very quickly, as you read 2 or 3 articles on proposed methodologies for change management, that there's kind of the standard components of that methodology. But go take a look. At least pick the best of those things and the ones that fit your culture. But the last one that I think is again, always falls off the list, but the fact that there needs to be formal training, and it's a continuous learning process on the change process. So you're not just looking at a regular basis. I'd say at minimum would be like at a quarterly basis. You have a meeting where you have key participants in that methodology, that process, the structure around change management, where you're talking about the process, what's working, what's not working, what from project that we've seen, how can we improve this, that continual process. Similarly, there should be on training to make sure people understand. New people are trained on it as they come in. Have and I've seen this done really well, where as new employees come in, you switch up who from the organization that goes and does the training and provides that, because nothing keeps it at the top of your mind than, hey, I have to go give a training class to 10 new employees on this process. I'm going to make sure that I'm ready, prepared with all of their questions, their various backgrounds coming in, but make that part of that cadence as well. So maybe monthly or quarterly basis for new people, and refresher for other people. Figure out what that is and what needs to be. Really, you can get a good idea of what you need to train on based on what parts of the process are people not adhering to.
Yeah, or asking questions about struggling with where their pain points are. In fact, in Six Sigma, one of the things we talked about is, when you roll out a project, usually the biggest risk to a project is the ongoing maintenance and support. It's the idea, like you just said, it's that continuous ongoing training, support, and updates that come with something. It's really easy to have a big idea, and it's really easy to come in and say, we want to do something new or exciting. What's not really easy is once that's been implemented, and then being like, let's make sure everybody knows how to do it, and let's make sure everybody's doing it well. And as we add people who weren't part of that, original change management plan, like you said, hey, I wasn't here for that. Like, what in the heck do I need to do? Not just dumping them in a chair and being like, well, figure it out, catch up, right? It's having some sort of formalized process to say, let's catch you up with the group so that you don't feel like you're so far behind. And I think that's a big part of that kind of ongoing, continuous, support, maintenance, learning that goes with anything that you implement.
Well, and I think that's a good segue into the whole idea of like, how do we integrate change management into our culture, into our organizational DNA, if you will. And so one, I mean, you're not going to be able to do something that big without having that leadership, that executive support. But some other strategies for making it part of the fabric of an organization is one. I'm like, you have to practice it. Practice what you preach.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we think about the idea of Kaizen, and we think about continuous improvement, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I personally feel like it's a little bit of, it's kind of like half mindset and half risk management strategy, right? It's the idea of, at a leadership level, understanding change is important and valuable. And if you sit still and the world kind of evolves around you, that you're missing out on a lot of opportunity, and you're actually setting yourself up to be, potentially vulnerable in a bad way. And so I think, just like you said, making that a core part of your foundational structure of who you are as a business, how you operate as a project, how you operate as a program, being flexible to that change, and having systems and processes that are built around that, I think is definitely probably one of the most important pieces.
Yeah. So again, I would say have a framework that you're going to go and work with. And then I think the hardest part is it's really easy to slip into this, like, well, we've achieved this, we're at this place, but we're having problems. Like, no, it's not, you're not done. It's not hey, and I've checked everything off on this list and we're now there. We are change, Sharon.
Well, it's kind of funny because
Change.
I think about this, in the forming, storming, norming, performing model. So we think about bringing a team together, and typically we go through these kind of maturity cycles where you form and then you storm a little bit and then you normalize, and then by that point you can become a performing team. I'm not saying you automatically, but you can, assuming that you follow the guidelines right. And what's really funny is, especially when I come into a new team, I think one of the things around change management is everybody thinks they're just always going to get along and everything's going to go beautifully. And you and I think, are both good at this. Is we're the people who walk in the room and like set the bomb off. It's part of who we are, right? But I think that there's value in that, because to make change part of an organization, not only do you have to be okay with change and be flexible, you have to be okay with dissonance, right? The idea that everything's not always going to go the way you expect, and that people are not always going to get along and agree about every single thing, and that's okay. In fact, when I come into teams or projects or things like that where they're struggling with stuff like that, they're like, we don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, the first thing you need to do is understand that it's normal for this to happen, and that's not only okay, but we want there to be that opportunity. We don't want everybody to be like in dissonance all the time, but we need to understand that sometimes that's just part of change, is feeling a little bit uncomfortable, and there's no easy button to get out of that.
Well, there's it's like, think of it from like a performance standpoint. Like, you always need to have stretch goals.
Mm-hmm.
It's not okay just like, my goals are the things which I know 100% I'm going to go and do. It's like, well, okay, you're never going to learn and grow. I mean, a muscle needs to be stressed, it fractured, broken in some ways for it to get stronger and improve and to grow. So there's market shifts, there's regulatory changes. Technology is constantly changing. New people come in, people leave. But if you become good at those things, or recognizing these things are always going to happen, then it can become a competitive edge for your company. You'll have more agility in your ability to take on more projects. People will have a better understanding of what they're really capable of doing. And it's actually, as a project lead, to understand, okay, I've got my 6 people, my 10 people, whatever it is that directly report to me. I know more what they're capable of. So when new requests come in, I know who I can go and ask, or even those that if I ask the question, that'll derail half their day of the stuff that they're doing now. So don't even ask them, knowing their limits around the people, which is another area of, can you manage people without ever talking to them? I would say no. And have those conversations, have those relationships. Maybe there's another topic that we can add to the list, Sharon. About that. But,
I know I love it when you take the one-offs, because it turns into things that ultimately we can build, great conversations out of. But no, I agree with that. I definitely think that, when we think about accepting change as part of the fabric of what we do every day, and figuring out, things are just going to be uncomfortable, and sometimes we just have to push harder to be successful, and just being okay with that. I know before we started the recording, I was, or before we started the stream, we were talking about this, and there's that idea of, it's just like this because we've always done it that way. And there's this sentiment that kind of happens, especially when you've been on a really well-performing team for a long time, or you've been on a good project for a long time, where it's like, oh, no, let's just keep doing it because it's always worked, as opposed to let's try a little bit to move out of our comfort zone to maybe be a little more successful, a little more efficient, a little bit more of something. And I think when you live in that, pushing maybe not so hard that you're in pain, but hard enough that that it's not easy all the time, I think there's a lot of value to becoming successful by being that way.
And I think that's so true. And that's very much, we've been talking mostly about like, internal facing, the aspects of this. But then there's the external, our customers, our partners, clients, as well as stakeholders that are outside of this organization. So having some degree of like transparency around the process, and so talking about here's our methodology, here's our structure, here's how we do things, and having that visibility, that transparency, which we have covered in past episodes. It makes them more confident. They know when they have a new request or they have a change or they see, they identify a risk that was maybe not on the radar around that. They understand that, fit into the process. It becomes part of that. I'm going to get data. I'm going to see it instantly get folded in. They then trust. They more trust that process, and they're more likely to be happy customers, happy partners with that. And because, as I say, one of my Buckleyisms, the more that people participate in the process, the more people trust that process and use the process.
Exactly.
And so that can't happen if people don't see it, if they're not given that opportunity to participate in that process.
Yeah, in fact, I have so many stories about ways that good change management have just like altered things. I have like two really short ones, but one of them is I went into an organization where once again there was an application they were using. It was like something in SharePoint, and they were trying to like fill out this information and it wasn't working well. Well, after I worked on a project where we improved the process and we improved the application, we had asked them, how many items are going to go in here? Oh, it's, a few thousand a year. So I'm like, okay, well, we can keep it in SharePoint. It'll be fine. No problem. And what ended up happening is because it improved that experience so well for the end user that within several months, they were hitting 50,000 a month. And so it had to be converted into a whole, custom application. And, you don't think about how things like that will make such a drastic improvement. I've got another organization that I've worked with for a number of years that I was brought in for something similar where the clients, basically the stakeholders, were turning in requests. And it was kind of a little bit of a jumbled mess. And they're like, look, we just want a way for them to enter their request, be able to solve the problem, and then have them know what's going on. And we put a lot of work and effort into really cleaning up that process. And the really cool thing that happened out of that is that they were happier. They knew what was going on. They were more communicated to. But like you said, what's really interesting is that the number of requests like tripled in the course of a year because they were now able to understand how to turn that request in and how to see where it was and how to see that it was actually happening. So that area actually grew because they were able to handle it that way.
And I would argue that you've tripled the volume of requests and things that have come in. But that also then, if you're consistent in the way that you react to those things, that you go take action on that, that's going to present opportunities for further automation, which means that you can then take in even more. So you might have tripled the volume of things that are coming in, but I'm sure that you automated a bunch of things on the back end that made it easier for that existing team. I mean, we're all about in this world now productivity and efficiency, that we want to do more with less, which usually means less budget, less people, less time to do the same things. But you can do that with the process in combination with the technology and automate a lot of that. But I know that with the time that we have here, just a couple more minutes, I wanted to kind of round it out around practical tips, because you and I both it's great. We're sitting here talking about these things at a higher level. What can people actually go do to get things started? So practical tips for building out a change management process within your organization. I always say start with a clear vision of what you do. Again, do some research, find out about things that are out there, but have a clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish and the scope of that, so that the organization better understands that this has to be communicated out. The organization understands why the change is happening and what the expected outcomes are, the timeline for those, and give that portfolio view of all the various initiatives that are happening. And then I'm also a huge advocate, as you know, Sharon, for creating a formal change management team. So this would be the one that's looking at, initially it might be weekly and then move to monthly and then quarterly, that's constantly looking at and adjusting, fine-tuning the process itself. So this is a change management team that's looking at how do we do change management in the organization, have various stakeholders, but the output of that is that you're putting a system in place. you're pulling from the best practices. You've got executive sponsorship for this to go and actually say, implement, this is the way that we're going to handle this going forward. And then the third piece is, I mean, there's other pieces, but is having that feedback loop must be in place day one.
You must have a feedback loop.
Right. So that because another problem is, and I've had this complaint where I've joined a company where I have years of experience that I brought into the company, but my new role may not be around this area. But if I don't have the way of saying, like, look, I did for 10 years, I owned all of this in this previous role. It's not part of my current job description. How are you ever going to draw that out? Know that I'm there. So having feedback loops for feedback as you're going, and allow people to participate in the process.
Even if it's generic and limited at first, perfectly fine.
Yep. And then, without, like, you can't measure something that is not moving forward. You need movement, you need activity. And so you do want to track then the effectiveness of that process, get to the point where you can create a baseline. Okay, we think we have this process in place. Let's create a baseline of what this looks like. And then relook at that on a regular basis at those KPIs. Are we delivering faster? Have we moved past each of these phases of a project? Have we gotten better at that? Are we more on time? Are we more within budget? How are we doing with personnel utilization? Like, whatever those KPIs are, look at those, talk about those things. And then an oft forgotten part of this entire process is to recognize and celebrate your wins. So you need to make sure that, especially people that are behind the scenes, pulling together, putting these pieces in place, you need to recognize them. Like, typically these people weren't hired to do that. And they're pulled into that. And people forget the effort it took to get it started up and going to operational. They just look at, where we are today.
Well, that's what I was going to say is, we talked earlier about stretching yourself and pushing a little harder and doing these things to get out of your comfort zone. If we're asking people to get out of their comfort zone, we're asking to push a little bit harder. We need to recognize that that is happening. And so I think the wins are super important because of that.
Yeah. This is just one of those things where you need to look internally. I think there's probably processes in place. You're doing some flavor of change management, even if you don't have a formal process. This is about formalizing that change management, making it a core strength within your culture. Change is inevitable. And organizations, I'll keep saying this till I die here, that organizations that have a robust change management practice, they're going to be better positioned and able to succeed in our constantly changing dynamic business landscape. It's just a fact.
100% agree. I think, it's the only constant is change.
Yeah. Well, Sharon, I think that's it for this week's episode. So for folks that are just joining, seeing this episode for the first time, joining us, you can follow Sharon and I. We're out on the Twitters, and you can find us all over the place out on the socials. You can find past episodes out on YouTube under @Buckley Planet, which is my personal YouTube. We're actually going to be launching before the end of the year, because this is an ongoing multi-year thing, people, of weekly. Yes, we know what we've signed up for. Weekly, every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, you'll find a new episode. Most of them live, some of them pre-recorded, but you can always provide feedback and join the conversation, especially over on Facebook. But we have some new things launching. We're going to have, before the end of the year, a dedicated site for this. And I believe we talked about building out the community pieces, because I know there's a lot of people increasingly that are not using Facebook.
Yeah.
So we've talked about moving off of Facebook over into a private, no advertising, no, like, your data and conversations will not be owned by Zuckerberg.
Yes.
Like,
or anybody else for that matter.
Anybody. And we're not spamming people to that list. Right. Anyway, before the end of the year, we should have all of that live. But you can please go in, share your stories there, and let us know what other topics you'd like to see covered.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot. See you later.